Hi, and welcome to my channel. I'm Tulio, and I will be talking to you about something that I haven't talked at all in any of my videos, which is analog synthesizers. Now, if you've been following anything that I've done, I'm mostly talking about FM synthesis because I am a big fan of FM synthesis and all that it does. It all comes from my passion for the Sega Mega Drive and the fact that it has a Yamaha 2612 inside, which is a pure FM synthesizer, just like you would find in one of those four operator DX series, except with a bunch of cut off functions. But enough about FM right now. We are here to talk about analog synthesis. So before anything, if you're new to the channel, I will be very appreciated if you would subscribe. It really means a lot to me. It gives me that motivation to continue making more videos and sharing my passions and going forward and trying new things like what I'm doing today. And I will already apologize in advance. It's the first time I'm using OBS to record this video, and I chose to use OBS because it allows me to switch cameras and kind of make it a little more interesting, visually interesting, the presentation of the video. And I will ask for feedback later. Anyway, so let's talk about analog synthesizers and why are they so popular. Well, I would already give you the answer. The short answer to why are analog synthesizers so popular is because they are easy to use and they are very powerful because they can create a wide variety of sounds and get actually some very convincing ones with just very simple, basic um, waveforms, pretty much. So to demonstrate what I'm doing today, I'm going to be using actual analog synthesizer, or I should say virtual analog synthesizers, or what they like to call the analog modeling synthesizer, which just means that it's a digital synthesizer, but it actually is able to reproduce the characteristics of an analog synthesizer. Um, the Yamaha CS is a commemorative synthesizer that Yamaha made along with three other synthesizers. There is the CS, which it takes over the CS series, with the Yamaha CS80 being the most iconic and respected of those. There is the Reface DX, which takes obviously after the DX series. And there is a CP, which takes over the CP, like CP88. And then finally the YC, which is an organ type synthesizer. I know it looks small and it looks like a toy, and I would say the same thing that I've seen in some reviews of this synthesizer. This is just looks like a toy. It is an actual, real, very powerful synthesizer, and we are gonna go over it and explain why. Okay, so let's start talking about what analog synthesis is, or what synthesis is at all. These products they start with creating something very simple called waveforms. So what waveforms are is just really really a voltage that goes, you know, up and down, and then that represents sound. And it's pretty much what drives your speakers. It's pretty much voltages being applied to your speaker, which makes the magnet moves, and then you get sound out of it. So analog synthesizers start with pretty much a basic oscillator, which is just something that, changes state and then creates those waveforms. And it does things like you get one oscillator creating one waveform, and then you have a second oscillator, for example, that adds another waveform that you can combine those to create a little bit more complex sound, and then you go there and you filter those sounds kind of reducing some of the frequencies that you don't want that to come out, and then you apply envelopes which makes the sound have a dynamic characteristic, pretty much controlling the amplification of the sound, making it louder or quieter as it goes over the time after you press the key, and that gives pretty much like a shape to the sound, which is characteristic of each instrument. Like for example, a flute, as long as you're blowing it on it, you have sound. Once you stop, the sound cuts off immediately. Whereas bass or a guitar, anything that you pluck, a piano, once you hit the key, that sound can sustain to a point until it kind of fades out because the string stops vibrating. So this it's created to start to generate sounds as such. Anyway, uh, I will start by pretty much showing this is how the CS comes pretty much out of factory, with the exception of the volume knob that I have here turned to the maximum. And I have here a handy oscilloscope that I will figure out a way to bring back. Just bear with me for a second. I think I shouldn't have hidden it. I'm sorry. Like I say, I'm doing this as if I was live. I know it isn't like true live. There you go. Hey, yes. So here's my oscillator. Um, so the oscillator, what it will do is will just show the waveform as it goes. So I'm starting with the basic waveform that comes in here it's turned on out of factory, and this is a saw wave. So just to give you some before I go on, to give you a little bit briefing on waveforms, right? So we are usually we think of waveforms as the sine wave, which is um, just basically smoothly oscillating up and down, and that smooth oscillation is, mathematically it's like driven by pi and cosines and things like that. Pretty interesting. um, but pretty much your most basic waveform that you can think of is a sine wave that pretty much is just the oscillator going from up and down state, accelerating, decelerating, accelerating, decelerating, and so on. Then you have your square wave, which is instead of having this smooth transition, it is a hard state. Binary state is either on or off, and it goes up and down like this. And you'll be very familiar with that type of sound from 8-bit games and your computer beeper, because it doesn't have that ability to transition smoothly through the states. Therefore, we have that very characteristic square sound. And finally, triangular waves, which go linear up and then linear down instead of being accelerating motion, exponential accelerating, decelerating. It just goes linearly up and down. And one variation of the triangular wave that everybody probably knows is a sawtooth wave, which just goes up and then drops down immediately, or just goes up immediately and drop downs linearly. So I'm starting with the saw wave here. If I press this key here, you will see a saw wave being generated. Just like I said, it ramps up and then drops down and then keeps going. Moving on to the square wave. Here's a square wave. You can see that it has that shape up or down, and the transition is pretty much like a straight line up. And it's an interesting thing to observe how the square wave, it looks like, it has this overshooting, like going a little bit up and down and going down and then going back a little up. And that is characteristic of analog circuitry. And even though this is digital, I don't know exactly how it converts the digital original signaling to the analog outputs. But we can observe this in analog synthesizers because there is capacitance on the circuit, so things go up and then it doesn't go exactly perfect square like you would see as digitally generated in plugins and stuff. And it's part of the charm. These imperfections is part of the charm of how analog synths that have, you know, very special sound. Finally, your sine wave. Let me pull out A so that you can think of your phone. There you go. Yeah, just take the phone out of the. That's the tone, the 440 hertz, or maybe in America you will hear more like something like this. It's just basically those two waveforms combined. Anyway, so there you can see that basically, or if I put it on your score wave, very 8-bit sounding. So now that we covered the bass oscillator, let's talk about the second main concept, which is the envelope. So the envelope, in very simple terms, a very simple way to explain envelopes would be to talk about how the sound, how basically it's controlling how fast your voltage, the voltage of the signal or the wave achieve the peak volume, and then how fast it then ramps down until it's not sounding anymore. And the envelope that controls that you see here, there is it's called, I mean, people would usually see those in synthesizers and plugins at these letters ADSR, and A is for attack, D is for decay, S is for sustain, and R is for release. So what does that mean? What attack means? So it means how fast the sound will ramp up to the sustaining voltage, so, or the same volume. Let me call those volumes instead of voltage. Kind of it sounds a little confusing when I'm talking about electricity, which is what everything is in the end. But so the attack will determine how fast you reach the sustained volume. Um, However, the attack it will always go to the maximum volume and then back to the sustained volume. The decay actually controls how fast, after the attack reaching that peak volume, how fast it goes down back to that sustained volume. And the release basically is when you release the key, how fast it decays into nothing. So let's go ahead and demonstrate this a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and hit, let's use a square wave. Yes, there you go. So I'm gonna go here and ramp up the attack a lot, and you will see how like slowly it goes up. Yeah. So if I release, it just goes away immediately. So attack basically does this, right? And then let's say if I lower the sustain volume something, look at what happened. Well, let me do this properly. So I'm now reducing. So let's go and imagine that the attack minimum position is the maximum attack, so super fast ramping up, and then as much as I add attack, what happens is you just get this slope reducing, and imagine that here is the timeline, so it's how fast in the timeline you reach that peak volume. Now for the decay is, if it's in the lowest position, what you see is that the decay is pretty much super fast. It's like it just goes immediately to nothing. And then as you increase the volume of the decay, it's pretty much, it takes longer to decay to that sustained volume. So now I took the decay out completely, and this is what I wanted to show. So if I just attack, and let me take the attack out so that it's even easier to demonstrate. So if I just like press this note now, you can see that it's just now a low volume, and the sustain is actually controlling how loud the note is. It's because what's happening is pretty much the attack is just ramping up, and then because it's so fast, the decay is so fast, it goes to that volume that I set in the sustain. So if I add decay now, you will see, oh yeah, so let me lower the sustain volume a little bit and then add a little bit of decay. You can see now that volume coming down like this, and then if I add some attack as well, then you see it opening up and closing like until you reach that sustain. And finally, the release, if I were to, it just goes away, but then if I start adding some release, so there you go. Now you have something that is even more 8-bit sounding. And it's interesting to note some of the chips like the AY38910, I like to say 8910, the AI is a General Instruments chip that was very popular. It has basically only 3 channels, 2 square waves, 1 noise, but it has an envelope generator, so you can actually pre-program it with envelopes, and then you just send the notes, and then you get the resulting sound from the chip. Now the chip used by the Sega Master System and the Sega Genesis, which is actually an implementation of the Texas Instrument 464. Oh my God! I did this again. 76489. There you go. The Texas Instrument 76489. It only generates square waves. It has 3 square wave channels plus 1 noise channel, but it doesn't have envelope generator. So which means that games back in the day, whenever they write their sound drivers, they would have to write ways to let the musician basically set those parameters in the music software, and the actual driver will be sending the volumes to the chip, which only had 16 volumes, and in controlling these decays in real time, and is sending the note at maximum volume and then panning the volume down. So it's pretty interesting. But more sophisticated chips would actually have envelope generators that will allow you to focus more on what notes you're sending and less about like sending a lot of commands to the chip to control volumes on real time. So now that we cover the envelope, and we can get like a good sense of what it means. Like if I want to make it a little softer, a little harsher. It's up to you, and you can tweak those parameters in Analog Synthesizers in real time to kind of add dynamics to your music as you perform. So now that I cover this, I'll reset these and then go back to the. Actually, before I go there, now just wanted to talk about one concept of the square wave. So the square wave, as you can see, it's one stage is up and one stage is down, right? But what you see here is that the space between each up and down is equal. Which we call that a duty cycle, or the pulse width. Imagining that every time it goes up, it's a pulse. This synthesizer has it's kind of limited in what you can do depending on the type of oscillator that you choose. You have a few functionality, but it has so what it has here for the square wave is a control that allows me to change the pulse width. So let's see how that looks so that we have an idea what's happening with the sound. So you see this sound is a little more round feeling, more full when it's in the 50% square wave. But as it goes up, it gets a little more harsh, a little more almost like a reed type of sound, which we can kind of leverage to try to simulate that those kind of instruments. It will also You will also notice that if I add a little bit of release, when you have this pulse width like this, it kind of sounds a little bit like a NES. That's because the PSG in the NES would allow you to control the pulse width for the square wave channels. And then it allowed you to create different textures in the sound, and it had the settings that was like a 50% square, the 25% square, and the 12.5% square, which pretty much allows you to kind of control a little bit the timbre of the instruments, and give it a little different characteristics in the sound. As you know, the tunes will get a little more richer as compared to tunes generated by the AY or the Sega PSG, the Texas Instrument PSG. Well, anyway, so now that I'm here with the square, actually I'm gonna use this opportunity to talk about the second, or the third, if you consider the envelope generator as second. So the first is oscillator, the second is the envelope, and the third, I will call it the filter. So the filter, what the filter does, it's in the case of this specific synthesizer, it gives me what it's called a low pass filter. And a low pass means it will let higher frequencies, it will let lower frequencies pass, it will block higher frequencies. And that can allow you to kind of shape the waveforms in different ways and kind of smooth out a few of the harshness. And I think that I'll give you a demonstration. You will see exactly what I mean right away. So looking here at this square wave, you can see it's pretty harsh on the corners. And then as I change the filter, look at what happened. So the first thing that you notice is as soon as I start moving the filter, didn't have to move it much, right? It kind of rounded the corners a little bit, actually make the square wave look more square than what it was before. And that the reason for that is because that overshooting, and it shoots and comes back to stabilize the wave so fast, it's actually a high frequency. It adds a little bit of that hiss that you hear a little bit when you have the square wave unfiltered, but as you lower it, you get like a more polished square wave. Now look at what happens if I continue to filter this. Now this actually looks more like a sine wave than a square wave, because it is doing that smoothing. It keeps doing that smoothing. So the transition that it was before, it was actually too fast, so it kind of smoothed it out, and you get that. I can get that phone dial tone again. And then if you keep doing that, eventually you see that it flattens out until it almost disappears. However, what if I go to a very low octave? You can still see it, right? It's still going around and moving, and that's because that's what the low pass side of the things mean. If I bring it back to what it was before, you will still see that as I round this a little bit. The higher frequency is a very low amplitude, and it goes back to the maximum amplitude as it gets close to the filter position that we are. Now, all the filters in those synthesizers, you always see that filter knob associated with a resonance knob. And what does that resonance mean? I read about it, and resonance has to do with some artifacts that are created that amplify a little bit the sound around the frequency that you're cutting off at. So let's say you're cutting off at 1000 hertz. That around that 1000 hertz, it actually get a little wider, and then above it, it kind of drops down like a lot. So what I'm gonna show you, for example, at the maximum cutoff, which pretty much, let's imagine it's something like near the 20,000 hertz or something. If I mess with the resonance now, you will see that that little high frequency gets amplified, whilst the slope, the other slope, the one that goes down or goes up on the way up, doesn't change a lot. So check it out. If I add this, look at that. Look at that, amplifying the high frequency, and it, spreads it out. And this can actually generate some pretty crazy sounds when you're in that like 1000 hertz, like 2000 hertz region, and you ramp the resonance. It can start self-oscillating, kind of like a feedback type of microphone feedback type of sound. It can be very loud and obnoxious. I'll try my best not to let it happen. So now we saw what this filter thing does, and then I think I'm just gonna go ahead and cover the fourth main concept or main stuff that you see in analog synthesizers, which is this thing here called the LFO. So LFO means low frequency oscillator. So you have these oscillators that make the sound. They can range from low frequencies to very high frequencies. But the LFO is never too high. And the LFO is actually not used to make sounds. It's used to affect sounds. And you can use it to affect in many ways. In this specific synthesizer, I have three knobs. One is the assign, one is the depth, and the other one is speed. So the assign knob tells me what is this LFO gonna be affecting. I have here amp, which is the amplitude or amplifier, whatever you want to call it. The second one is filter, which is the LFO can be kind of driving the filter, and that can create very interesting sounding things. And then I have here pitch, which, like I said, like it says, it will drive the pitch and make sort of the vibrato sound. The amplitude control FO makes more of the tremolo type of sound. And there's one top setting here called Oscillator, and it basically is specific function of the LFO for the type of oscillator that you select. This is more specific to the reface. I'm not gonna go into detail on what that is. So just to demonstrate a little bit how that works, so here's my square wave, and let's switch this LFO to pitch so that you can see what will happen once I start give it some depth. And you can see that frequency changing, and if I change the speed, so it can make kind of crazy sounds and interesting things, but you can actually kind of create a very, sorry, little, if you reduce how much, not ideal for this particular sound in here, but it gives you an idea. Now if I change the amplitude, look what happened. So that oscillator is now driving the amplitude and create this tremolo. Create this type of tremolo, crazy, well, not crazy. It was common to see this in vintage amplifiers, like guitar and type of amplifiers, and it's a very interesting effect that you can take advantage of depending on the type of music that you're making. All right. So now that I went over these, let's kind of explore how do we make sounds, or how do we use this knowledge of what each function does to kind of to control the type of sound that we want to make. So let me put this here. Actually, before I go into that, I was forgetting one little thing. So I select here the saw wave. And I want to talk about all of these demonstrations that I did with a single oscillator. Now imagine if you add more oscillators, you can kind of color the sound, you can add harmonics, you can add things that kind of make the sound more full and something. And one of the main things is that most of these analog synthesizers, I would say probably all of them, have at least two oscillators. Some will have three oscillators. I don't know of any that have more than three. I'm more familiar with Roland analog synthesizers, and I only know of them having up to three oscillators. But it's basically you just add more sounds and more waveforms to that sound, and kind of can create textures, if you will. So here with the saw wave, this has a specific function that when I change this modulator knob, it adds a sub oscillator, which is pretty much another oscillator. And as I move this, that oscillator will detune from the original tune of the main oscillator, and that will add a little chorus effect, right? So let's see how that sounds and how it looks. Look at that. Now, how does this sound? Now it starts sounding a little more like the type of saw wave that you use when you test any preset synthesizer saw, or MIDI preset saw has this kind of sound because it's more colorful, more rich, and it's interesting to see like how it looks like it's kind of moving, right? So what basically is that just that little detuning, as the waves, they are no longer synchronized. They as they combine with each other, it does that thing that the waves do. That one is going up and one is going down. The when they add up, they pretty much like one can subtract from another or add to another, and so you have these amplitudes kind of looking like they are alive. And that's pretty much what it does. And if I keep detuning, it can go pretty crazy. And sometimes it sounds nice, sometimes it sounds a little exaggerated, but then that's what it does. But when you think of what would you do things like that? Like imagine an orchestra, and imagine when you have like a violin, right? So a violin, when you're going through one string, that string is vibrating and generating that waveform that you listen. And then let's say like you have now a section of violins, and even though I know the violinists are very skilled in tuning their instruments to that main tone that you hear at the beginning of a concert, um, they will never get precisely in tune with the other violins. They will be very close, but they will never be perfect. But that difference kind of generates that characteristic sound that you hear when you have a section of strings together, because they have a little bit drifting from each other, and that generates that kind of more lush sound, more polished sound. Something that, with a single violin or violoncello, you can hear more the harshness of the string vibrating, and it kind of smooths it out. So let's see if we can try to apply that concept here, and generate and see if we can come up with something interesting. So if I were to think about a violin, right? So that definitely doesn't sound like a violin. So let's add a little bit of attack to it. okay, maybe sound like a little bit like it. So I wanna reduce a little bit the sustain volume and add a little bit of decay. And I should be actually showing this part, right? There you go. And let it vibrate slightly, just so that's not too harsh. Now let's go ahead and start filtering this kind of to try to sound a little less square wave-ish or saw wave. Maybe. And I should apologize because I am unable to play pianos. I can kind of fake it in chord stuff, but whenever I'm playing stuff here, it is gonna be like 99% just random stuff, and I'm really sorry about not having the skill to demonstrate the best melodies for each instrument. But anyway, it's a little muffled, right? So let's see if the messing with the resonance can. Yeah, maybe. So now let's modulate this. Let's add those extra oscillators and see if we can get like a better texture that can resemble like a string section. Oh my, I didn't think it would come up this fast. So as you can see, it's just a little bit of filtering, kind of messing with the resonance so that it kind of boosts a little bit those mid frequencies, and you get something like this. And then I get to kind of try and embarrass myself trying to play something from Zelda. And again, I'm not skilled, so just bear with me. But you get it. So now that was an actual proper melody. Well, not properly executed, but you get the idea of what you can do with these sounds. And then, yeah, it's just that ability of creating instruments without having to have the real instrument there. And now imagine that, you know, you want to add strings to your song and you're in the 70s and you don't have the money to hire a violinist, or you don't know anyone, or you don't have access to it, but you have a guy that can play organ or keyboards, and then they will be able to then basically play those harmonies and create those sounds with this instrument that seemingly is just creating very basic waveforms. Anyway, so that it's a demonstration of something you can do with the square wave. Now, if you think of square wave, sorry, I'm talking about saw waves. Now, going back to the basic saw wave, uh, we have seen rock bands of the 80s actually using synthesizers a lot, and then this is one example of a band, a sound that was used by a very famous band. So let's see if I can get that. Yeah, I want this attack to be very harsh. You already know what I'm going for? That's fine. Let's see if I... yeah. Yeah, so now just like a very harsh square wave, unfiltered, maybe a little bit of resonance to boost a little bit those high frequencies, and you can do stuff like this. And again, sorry, I don't know how to play. There you go. Maybe a little less this one. Yeah, there you go. Mm. Yeah, look at that. So we just like probably I would need to kind of tweak a little bit more here and there to get like a perfect sound. But that is just an example of how easy it is to go from one sound like I was on a violin and then just tweak it and then go into something else. All right. So now another thing that saws are very used for, and when you think about analog synthesizers, is actually to make bass sounds. So let's go and see if we can create something. So let's go all the way to the lowest octave. And let's take all this out. Well, bass usually does a sustain like this, so I'm gonna take all the sustain down. Yeah. Does it sound like a bass yet? No, right? So let's mess with the filter now. Maybe add a little bit of resonance. What do you think? So, not very convincing as a bass, right? Probably for someone. Now, I want to go into an interesting concept, which is this manipulating filters in real time, right? If I were to do something like, well, now it's starting to sound more like a synth bass, right? So what in this synthesizer you can do is you can define whether the envelope generator is controlling the amplitude or the filter. So you actually can fade from one into the other one. So I'm gonna go ahead and change that now. Maybe add some. Yeah. So that can sound a little bit more like a bass, yeah. So I have prepared here one actual bass melody in FL Studio, and this bass melody hopefully you will be familiar with. Let me just confirm this is working, and then I will actually mess with the bass and try to make it sound better. So let's go ahead. You probably already guessed what this is. So let's go ahead and play this. So what can we do here? Oh, it's definitely a 2 oscillator in the original one. So let's go ahead and add a little bit. less of that, like, maybe a little miss. Yeah, there you go. So, just a few tweaks, and then look at what I got. Yeah, and I actually had prepared, I should have been showing this while I was making my changes. Sorry about that. I will do better next time. So, there we go. Very convincing bass sound. Now, I just wanted to go for one last thing regarding saw waves is how this ability actually, I think that's one thing that I miss with the Axel Foley. That's why I'm like, it's sounding right, but it's missing something, and that is that detuned oscillator. Ah, now, there you go. Yeah, I'm ready to watch Beverly Hills Cop now. Oh, how about this? Oops, not that fast. Oh yeah. So very simple waveforms. And there you go. So now one last thing to go on saw waves. They are widely used on electronic music, dance music, trance music. So let's go from a very pure waveform. Yeah. Let's go from a very pure waveform into the trance super saw. I have another patch here. Yes, and I will do this properly, which is by showing you FL Studio whilst also showing the keyboard. So there you go. So here we go. This as you can see, this is definitely an arpeggio. And this is actually something that's very interesting, is very common from that era of analog synthesizers is sequencers. So sequencers would allow you to do things like, let me see if I can show you. I have like arpeggiator functions here. So for example, if I select its arpeggiator going up, and I will say, oh, I don't know, it's going up on a major chord. So, and then like a 1 octave range, I don't know. See, as you change your bass note, it generates other notes for you. And sequencers kind of work like that, but they allow you to define. I think like FL Studio, there is like a sequencer function here, and you could go here and let's say I want to play this note, this note, this note, this note, jump this note, play this note, and this and this, and then like this. And then I can go here and change, like, this note is going in a different like different arrangement and so on like that, but that's what not we're here for. It's just something that you would, for example, create these sequences of notes, and then as you use your keyboard, it actually can transpose those notes with the different ranges between them and allow you to create very interesting, complex stuff. And you will see that used a lot in the late 70s and 80s. This is an arpeggio for a song called Hanging On, and Hanging On is a song by Blake Reary. This is from a remix made by Iridium, which used to be included with every FL Studio, maybe up to FL Studio 12. I don't know if it's still included with FL Studio 20, but this song pretty much has a very trancy arpeggio, which is excellent to demonstrate what I want to talk about. So let's kind of go ahead on this and display with the most basic waveform, and you see how we can transform a single saw into something that is very powerful and very dancey. So let's go. Yeah, not very interesting, right? So let's change a little bit of the release. Not too much, not too much. Yeah, this works fine. So I only tweak the release. Now let's just add that sub oscillator, the detune oscillator. What happened? Getting interesting. Oh yeah. Now add the texture, which is just one octave below. Oh, check that out. Saw waves. Now I can tweak the filters, as you will often hear on those type of songs. Add some resonance. Extra bite. Wow, it's that simple. It's that simple. So, what about square waves, right? There's gotta be something interesting that we can do with them. So let's go ahead, reset the controls, and call a square wave here. So, of course, for the most basic square wave, you can think of very round sounds like whistles and flutes and stuff like that. So if I were to add maybe more like this. A little vibrato, I guess, will help, right? Not too much. Not too much. Yeah, that works. What else? Let's play with the modulation here. Can I make this into a kind of accordion type of sound? Let's add a quarters effect. Maybe not that much. Take the pitch out. it sound like I'm in Paris or something? Or Paris? Well, if I could play a proper melody, probably, right? Now if I go to lower octaves. Kind of dark. If we change this to be... Can I make a bass out of this? Let's take the bass, the chords off. Oh! Huh. More synth. Less. Ah, there you go. Yeah, so even with a square wave, you can actually create a bass type of sound. Now, let's imagine I do this fast attack. I can actually come to something actually almost sounding like a piano, huh? Ah, that's better. This could pass as a piano, you know, if you had other instruments, and especially when you think of music from the 70s and the 80s, where being perfect wasn't that important, so realistic. I think it's more like late 80s in which synthesizers like started emphasizing too much on samplers and getting too realistic, but yeah. I actually tried that with the Saw Wave. It actually does sound okay. You probably will have to change a little bit, but it can work. It feels like I have more of that piano harmonics when I'm doing this, but yeah. So that was actually something quite useful. Now let's go into the sine wave, because sine wave is something that is very flat when you think of how it sounds, and you know, it's just that muffle type of sound, but we can make changes to it. We can, like, by messing with this texture, you can, kind of add a little bit of harmonics to a square wave like this, or a sine wave. You can actually make it kind of sound like a voice. Let's see. A little bit of decay. Does it sound like a voice? Maybe not, but let's filter it a little bit. Add a little bit of that resonance. Sound like a voice yet? Nope. Let's. I think it's the pitch that's missing. Huh? Does it sound like a voice? Oh yeah. So there's little things, right? Because people, when they sing, they have vibrato. That pitch is not constant. And then you can think of, like Genesis, like. So add a little bit of echo. Or, Jean-Michel Jarre, maybe one octave up. Yeah, you can make those adjustments and come up with very rich, interesting sounds. Yeah, I think I could continue covering many different types of sounds. For example, how you can make like a brass sounding. Just by adding a little bit of that filter envelope, you get to have that opening that comes with brass sound. Where is the... I don't think I remember how to do it. No, I don't remember how to do this. I'm sorry. No, I'm not gonna go there. So yeah, maybe. Yeah. Maybe that one needs a little less filter. Yeah, more like this. Yeah, nice. Yeah, so There you go. There you go. Very simple mechanics and simple things allows you to create very rich, interesting sounds. You can go from just like something like strings to flutes to very powerful electronic type of saw waves and square waves. Like if you add some chorus to, that sounds like your general square wave that you get in any like MIDI type of instrument. So there you go. I think that is a good stopping point. My last actually I recorded this video twice. This is the second time I'm recording it because the first time turns out that my voice was not in sync. And every time I was playing the keyboard, I was getting the echo from the delay of my voice overlaying with what I was playing. It was getting very messy, and I ended up having to record again. And it was over 1 hour, that video. And I don't know, I think I went into so much detail. Yeah, yep, I can see. This video is actually longer than the first I did already. So I'm just gonna end here and just let you know that I'm still an FM guy, but now I just really developed this appreciation for analog synthesis because in the past I always thought that analog synthesis was just about those basic square wave or saw wave. I didn't realize that you can really create rich instruments like I demonstrated right now, and I can't believe that there may be so many more people out there. They are more skilled than I am and can generate even more um, interesting sounds. I just like to, whenever I'm listening to music, like I listen a lot of Jean-Michel Jarre and Vangelis, and whenever I'm listening, I like to go and try to reproduce with the CS the sounds to see whether I can make analog sound synthesizer, and yeah, I would say 90% of the time I'm actually successful. Which reminds me that if you have a CS, a Yamaha Reface CS, I have an account in Sound Mondo, and if every time I create a sound that I think is interesting, before I tweak the knobs, I like to save it there, and I always make my sounds public. So feel free to go there, download those sounds, and try it out. It's on Sound Mondo. You probably have to search for my name, Tulio Gonçalves, or I will actually leave links in the description to that, so that it's easier. I'll also link to my SoundCloud where I actually post the samples of the sounds that I use on the Sound Mondo, with the exception of one because SoundCloud gave me a copyright match and doesn't allow me to post that sound, which then I posted on YouTube, which also got a copyright match. But at least they allow me to have the sound there. It's just monetizes for whoever owns rights to that song. It's actually Second Rendezvous from Jean-Michel Jarre. That it's actually kind of flattering to see that I created a sound that actually got a copyright match as if it was the original song. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, again, I will be very appreciative if you do like and subscribe. It means a lot to me. I don't monetize my channel. I don't have any interest in making a living out of YouTube. I'm just here to share my passion and go, make share my knowledge, anything that I discover, like I did when I was building my keyboard and learning electronics as I went, and all the new things that I come up with. And today's music, tomorrow can be something else, but I have a hint that it's always going to be somewhere around music, maybe a little bit of game development when I start running my game company again, maybe next year, because master degree is just eating up the rest of my free time. So again, if you enjoy, like, subscribe, share, show other people. I really appreciate every time somebody writes a comment. I tend to answer to all of them, but if I don't answer, at least I read all of them. And if you have any feedback, if you enjoy this type of video, let me know. Perhaps I should try to make them shorter because I'm going 1 hour 10 minutes now. Uh, but maybe any topics, anything that you think I may know, or if I don't, maybe I'll just go ahead and research and try to build something. But whenever I'm going unscripted like this, I tend to ramble a lot, play a lot of keys and try to demonstrate things, and it turns out that I can go very long. But it's like that with things that you love. Am I right? Anyway, thank you very much again. Please make sure that if you have any feedback, I'll be happy to hear if you enjoy this. And um, yeah, so thank you thank you very much for watching. Until the next video. Bye bye.